Hey guys, Jeremy here with Simple Life. Thank you so much for being a Patreon supporter. I really do appreciate it. And this is my way of saying thank you. Just one thing that I can do. This is an exclusive voiceover for the Gyuto build that I had. This video is very popular on YouTube, and there were a lot of questions that I wasn't interested in answering on YouTube, and we'll get to that in a minute. So you guys are going to get a little bit of insider information here, and other than that, it's going to be a typical voiceover build that I used to do more of, I think. Anyway, so that very first knife that we used, that was actually the second knife. I made two of these knives when I was doing this project, and the first one I actually just drew the lines out onto paper, but then I used that one as a template to trace just for this build. So I was cutting it out here, and one question I get asked a lot is what are the blades that I use on my portable bandsaw? And I use 14 tooth Milwaukee blades pretty much exclusively. That's all I leave in my bandsaw, and they work great for steel, for wood, for synthetic handle materials. I just pretty much leave them in there, and I really like them. After we've cut that out, we're gonna do some basic profiling here, shape the tang. I'm putting a slight taper in that tang there, and just so it's a little easier to fit into the handle, and I don't have to worry about the fit up at the bolster as much. And then once we get that done, I always like to go over the profile, running the grind lines parallel with the blade. I just find it looks better, and it's easier to tell if it's actually straight that way as well. So we've got that done. And the next thing we'll do is clean up that choil area there a little bit. This is one of my favorite shaped blades. I don't know why, but some of these Japanese kitchen knives that have this choil that kind of comes back in towards the handle, but then also kind of straightens out right at the heel there. I don't know, I find that to be I just love the look of that curve. It's like my sweetest line, my favorite line in knives, I think. And so we got that cleaned up. Now I'm going to put on my Bill Benke file guide. And if you're a new maker, just getting into this, I would recommend one of these tools. I'm thinking about doing a video on basic tools, for beginning knife maker. And this is probably going to be one of the ones that I would highly recommend, even if you're just starting out. You can use it with a file, you can use it with your belt grinder once you get one. And they just it's so versatile, and it does so many different parts of knife making that are hard to get done evenly with just measurements alone. And this thing's wear like a pig's nose, I tell you. They're phenomenal. Bill Benke, I have no affiliation with him. He's a super great guy, good customer service, just a straight up honest guy, and I have recommended his products very highly. So once we've cleaned that up on that shoulder up on the belt grinder, removed the most of the material, I'll go through and just finesse it with files. So I don't go right to the file guide with the belt grinder. And then also I want to leave a radius in there. If you had a hard 90 at that joint instead of radiusing it out at the shoulder, there is potential for stress cracks, stress fractures, and sometimes those even happen during the heat treat. So here I'm just measuring it out just to kind of demonstrate that we do indeed have a taper. It's getting narrower as we get towards the end of the tang. That's how I tried to explain it in my video. And then there you go, we can see we've got the radius on there, and it's nice and flat, so when we fit it up to the bolster, it's going to be really, really nice. Now what I'm doing is I'm thinning out the tang. I hadn't taken the file guide off because of the material. We're creating another shoulder there so that the bolster, the bottom of that blade there, that shoulder will fit really nice and flat on the bolster. And then I'm just cleaning it up with a file, smoothing everything down, getting it nice and flat. And yeah, that's about what we're doing here. Just different camera angles showing, I don't know, sometimes that looks kind of cool. Fast forward, you can see material disappearing. And then I'm kind of just knocking off those hard edges a little bit too, just so we can, ultimately I'm trying to do as much as I can to make it easier to fit up into the tang. Since making this video, I've learned some great ways to do traditional wah style handles. This is definitely not traditional. This is a more complicated way to go about it, but this is the way that I just decided to do it. So that's pretty much finished up, and give a little chop demonstration. We'll look at that. Yes, it's a kitchen knife. Good for me. Now what I'm going to do is put in a couple of little grooves, just little notches into the spine, and the reason for those is to grip onto the epoxy. When I fill the void up in the handle with the epoxy, I just kind of like, the thought that there's going to be epoxy getting in there, and as it dries, obviously, it's going to make it very difficult for that handle to come out. So that's all that those were for. I wanted it to be very, very comfortable no matter where you held the knife. So I didn't want a hard 90-degree spine. And in fact, I ended up basically making it like round on top. And so that's what I'm doing here, just kind of rocking it back and forth on my belt grinder. I like the aesthetics of that look. And then also it is, again, just more comfortable in the hand. There's no, if you were using this knife for an awful long time, you wouldn't get sore spots, you know, from a hard edge on the top of the spine there. And then I'm using the pneumatic needle scaler here to put some texturing on. Now this blade is very, very thick. It's a lot thicker than what you'd typically do for a chef's knife. The reason for that was because this is actually a gift from my parents for Christmas. And typically they're not that great on their knives. They don't look after their knives well at all. And honestly, I was really afraid they'd put this in the dishwasher, so I had to tell them, I said, okay, this does never go in the dishwasher. But I ground it really, really thin, and then the weight of it is kind of nice too. I know like typical and traditional Japanese knives are very light, and they're very wieldy. They feel amazing, but I wanted to make something a little thicker. I still ground it nice and thin at the tip, but this is definitely a thicker blade. I had that comment a lot on the YouTube comments, and quite a few hate comments about it too, but it's like, go ahead, man, make a knife the way you want to then. So, you know, you just like Carl Ruiz says, I do what I want. No, I don't quite feel that way, but when I make my knives, that's exactly my attitude. I just do whatever I want, and not saying it's right, not saying it's proper, but it's what I do, and I'm sharing it. So, and there we have that needle scaled texture. I love that texture. And it saves so much time in the long run because I don't have to worry about hand sanding that part of the blade. And, you know, you can have a lot of imperfections. And even when the end user is using the knife, you know, they can beat it around and it's just the bevels that are going to get marked up, right? So I really like that texture for that reason. And I just think it looks good too. What I'm doing here now is rounding out that finger choil. And again, this is done. I like the aesthetics of it. I think it looks better. I mean, people can tell there's a little more work that goes into it, but it also makes it much more comfortable. You know, I guess my parents, they're not going to be using this knife that much. They don't do a lot of cooking, but they do have friends over sometimes, and you know, they live in a nice community. I think they like to show off to their friends. I'm not sure, but I wanted them to have a really nice. And I wanted this knife to be more visually, maybe a spectacle. But this is definitely not the best performing kitchen knife, not by any means. But it cuts really well. I quite like it, and yeah. Now what I'm doing here is the stainless steel foil pouch. This is a toolmaker steel. I think this is the 402, 404. I forget exactly what it is, but this stuff's ridiculously expensive. It's about, I'm guessing like 50 feet of it is like $180 or $280. One comment on this video, somebody said, oh, what kind of a stupid heat treat is that? It doesn't even melt the aluminum foil. You didn't get the knife hot enough. And it's like, I didn't even respond to that. It's funny how on YouTube, some of these comments you can tell right away from the comment whether the person has ever tried any of this stuff, right? People leave these ridiculous comments, and just based on that comment, it's like, you've never made a knife before, so what are you talking about? And this is a tool that I've just recently discovered to use with my foil pouches, and that's just those sheet metal Mechanica shears or sheet metal pliers or whatever. Cheap. I mean, I think I got this at a garage sale, and it works really, really well for that. Now, this was one part that had a lot of questions, and people were wondering why I covered up the logos and the temperature on my kiln. To tell you the truth, the biggest reason is that, you know, I'm not necessarily into doing free advertising for companies, and I mean, I like even heat. Obviously, everybody knows that's an even heat kiln. I wasn't trying to hide my temperatures at all, although the advantage to not sharing that stuff is people aren't going to argue with you about the way you're doing it. Inevitably, you put something on there. You know, I heat treat to, well, this was 1950 that I brought this to, and I held it there for 20 minutes. Guaranteed you're going to get a bunch of negative comments about that, so sometimes it's nice to avoid it altogether. Now, this one actually came out super nice and straight. The other one that I did, it actually had a big old warp in it, and that seems to be fairly typical with Nitro V, from my experience anyways. Another question that I had on the YouTube video was why didn't I use my liquid nitrogen? And the reason for that was simply that this blade didn't fit into the opening of my door that held my liquid nitrogen. Also though, in talking with Mike of Ecom Knives, he was talking with the gentleman at New Jersey Steel Baron, the people who make this steel, and they told him that just a dry ice slurry is enough for Nitro V. Some steels like the CPM 154, those really do need a deep cryo with liquid nitrogen to get that full cold treatment benefit, but but from what I've heard and from what Mike has told me, I trust Mike, he's a good guy. They don't really need it. The Nitro V doesn't need the full liquid nitrogen treatment. So it worked out good in this situation because I kind of went to put it in my doer and I was like, oh man, it doesn't fit. Also, Nitro V, I've made some blades with Nitro V without cryogenically treating them at all, and they hold edges really, really well. It's one of those steels that benefits from cryo, but it's not absolutely necessary. So if you don't have cryo and you want to try Nitro V, I honestly wouldn't let that stop you from giving it a shot, because I made about 5 blades with Nitro V before I cryoed them, and my wife still has one of them, and it holds an edge phenomenal. I haven't sharpened it yet. She doesn't use it all that much, but she's had it for a few years, and I'm really actually quite impressed with Nitro V. Now I'm just taking various blocks of wood. I don't know what this wood is. I'm not sure. This here is curly maple, and I'm just squaring everything up on my milling machine. Ultimately, for me, I find everything so easy when it's just dead square, dead flat, and so I like to do these things. It just, for me, it eliminates my error, and I have a hard time lining things up as it is. So if I can get everything as close to perfectly sized and flat and true, I just give myself a big old benefit. Now, what I was doing there was just putting some random lines on there so that I can see once I've brought everything to flat. And once those lines are all completely gone, then I know that that is a completely flat piece of wood. And this disc grinder, I mean, it's a recent addition to my shop, but I absolutely love it. Now, this here is a big cheat. I know there's a lot of really great guys that make knives, Wachschuh knives on Instagram, Origin Handcrafted. They've all asked me, how do you get the holes in your bolsters without a milling machine? I'm just like, yeah, I got a milling machine. You know, people are like, you know, they'll get mad and say, oh, you can't do that. It's like, well, why not? You know, I mean, it's my milling machine and I have it. I'd be foolish just to ignore it and be like, no, I'm going to do it the hard way. So this is definitely huge help. And this is that little brooch that I made. If you haven't seen that video, I did a little build video, whoops, on it, and it's actually really handy. That is just 01 tool steel. Very simple the way that I made it. Wasn't anything too fancy. I didn't use my milling machine for it, and cut out in the bandsaw, heat treated it, and it's been working fantastically. Really impressed with that little tool. So now all I'm going to do here is cut out this little G10 spacer. This was a handle dud. I think I cut out the handles and the knife didn't, I don't know, piece of scrap, and I thought I may as well utilize it for this purpose. And I just wanted something in there just to give it a little extra pizzazz between the maple and then that darker wood. And now I'm starting to set the holes where the tang is going to go into. I used a countersink or a piloting bit just because they're so rigid. And then I went to the regular bit in my milling machine here, and this doesn't work that great. If I had really, really long end mills, I would love that, but I can't seem to find them anywhere. So I kind of get some of the holes started, but I'm still in there in the main portion of the handle, roughing out a lot of material, and actually did quite a bit. I don't show it all in the video because that would be kind of boring, but it actually took a fair bit of time to get this thing roughed out. I have done some where I've burnt in the tangs, and I know based on watching Forged in Fire, you know, they say that's such a risky thing to do. But I've had some good success burning in some tangs. Obviously, you have to watch your heat treatment, but maybe we'll do that in another video in the future. But hollowed out, and then the one nice thing too with doing a separate bolster is I get a really nice precise fit on the bolster. And then the handle part, I mean, that can be a little bit big, and it's not that big of a deal. And then here's another super cheat, is that... well, I don't think normally they make the handles like this, put 45 degrees on. That's actually just a countersink bit, and I just put it in like that. This here is just a piece of dowel that I'm milling a slot into, and this is just going to be an interim handle so that I have something to hold on to while I grind in the bevels on this knife. And it's actually fairly similar way that they do traditional wah style handles. A lot of times they'll drill like a 3/8 hole into the main handle, and then they'll do exactly what you saw me do there, like put a slot in a dowel and then just shove that dowel in the hole with some glue. Obviously you don't get the most amazing look if you don't finish up the bolster or dress it up a little bit beyond that. But actually some of my viewers let me know that that's actually how they do the traditional wah style handles, so that was really cool to learn. And this is my jig for marking my grind lines. And again, this was a tool that I made. I did a video about it, but I think I had horrible music on it, and a lot of people did not enjoy that video at all. But yeah, the music was very tribal, if I remember correctly. And just kind of some of the process of grinding. This was all freehand ground. And I don't know, one of my favorite parts about making a knife is grinding the bevels in. And you know, the nice thing too with a thicker blade like this is that you have time to establish where you want your bevel to be. And, you know, and as things are going, you know, if you need to bring it up higher on the blade, you can just kind of, you know, use some wrist pressure and just kind of manipulate it that way. If you need to bring the edge tighter, if you've got your grind as high as you want it to be, you can just, you know, use some wrist pressure the other way and kind of, you know, put a little more emphasis on the edge. But this, I don't know what it is about grinding knives, I just love doing it. And then this was actually the main reason that I bought my disc grinder. It was for flattening out bevels, and it is amazing how much flatter they are coming off of a disc grinder than off of a belt grinder. Even when you hold your knife at an angle, so you're going across more of your flat platen, it's amazing. You think it's perfectly flat off the belt grinder, and then you put on the disc grinder, and it's like, whoa, man! You see all your high spots, and it works really good. I'm a huge fan of this tool. This was one of the tools I was like, man, why on earth did I wait so long to get it? Also, one thing that I use, if you're going to get a disc grinder, I would recommend getting that 3M Feather Disc Adhesive, it's called. I think I have the Feather Disc Adhesive too. And basically, it's an adhesive that goes on there, and you can peel off your paper, put a brand new paper on. The paper you just pulled off has no residue on it, and the new paper you put on sticks. And I get about 30 paper changes before I put on new adhesive. So it's not like, you know, that Super 77 spray adhesive where you need to clean it off all the time. It's really an interesting product, and it works really well. And then the main advantage to a disc grinder, huge advantage, and I learned this from Jeff Fader of Fader Knives. We did a live stream together talking about this on Instagram, and you really eliminate a lot of hand sanding. So I think I probably only spent about 15 minutes hand sanding this blade, and what I'm actually finishing it up with right there, I don't mention this in the video, but that is 800 grit sandpaper, and then some Meguiar's, I think it's the 20X scratch remover, and that just does an incredible job of taking out your J-hooks, and it leaves a really, I don't know, it's just an amazing finish on the blade. It almost has like a little sparkly grain in it, but it looks smooth as butter. We'll see it at the end of the video, but Meguiar's 20X scratch remover. I got that from Built Sharp. I saw it on his Instagram, and I decided that he didn't use it in this application, I don't think, but I use it with 800 grit sandpaper, and really, really happy with that. So there's another little gem for you guys that support me, you know, try and give as much as I can. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask me via this platform. I mean, definitely for you guys that are Patreon supporters, I'm here for you, right? I mean, if I can help you out in any way with personalized, specific information, absolutely, I'll do whatever I can. And then we're just using the DevCon 5-minute epoxy. You know, it's one of these things, I started with that, and it always works for me, and so I haven't had a reason to go to a different epoxy yet. There's lots of other great epoxies. Some I want to try, but then I'm also like, I know what works. Well, why change it, right? And I don't see any downsides to what I'm using. So I guess, you know, you pick your poison, pick what you like, and you stick with it. And then just making sure I get all the squeeze out from up in the bolster, because we got a really nice tight fit up there. And it would be a shame to have to try and remove any glue that's squeezed out of there. So definitely get it all cleaned up. There you can see how tight we got that shoulder and the bolster to meet up there. It looked really good. And I let that cure overnight. Came back the next day, and now really all we have to do is shape up the handle. And I did a little bit of the roughing on the belt grinder. I never showed that. I was just I had the footage of it, but I was like, man, this thing's getting a little long. This was a fairly long video, like 23 minutes or something. But so I just skipped right forward to the part where I'm on the disc grinder here. And it's so nice having a disc grinder for this, because, you know, these, I put on some facets there, and a lot of traditional Japanese handles have those. But it is so nice to be able to use it, do that on a disc grinder. And really, really like it. The other thing that I don't really show here, and I had some comments on YouTube, is that I did put a slight angle on the handle. So at the bolster, it's narrower than it is way at the end of the handle. I should have done a little bit more. I think maybe a little more would have been better. But a lot of people had commented on the YouTube video that it was totally flat, you know, totally parallel. That's actually not the case. There's it's probably only like 1/8 of an inch difference, so it's not that significant. But I did indeed put a little taper in that handle, and it feels pretty good. I think next time I'll definitely put a little bit more. And then this was kind of a last minute decision, but I thought I might as well do it. And I wanted to just round it out. Now this isn't called a D-shaped handle. There's a couple different names for the Japanese handles. I think this is, I don't know, just around, I don't know exactly what it's called, but there is a D-shaped handle, and I thought this was that at first, but after researching it some more, that's actually quite different, and it looks fairly difficult to do, but from a utilitarian standpoint, I think it works really well in the hand. And then to finish this off, I'm using Boost Block oil. That's a oil. It's a food safe oil to use for wood cutting boards. Boost is the name of cutting boards, a brand, and they sell their own oil. We had some, so I use it. It's definitely one thing to consider, you know, when you're doing kitchen knives, is that if you're doing wood that needs to be protected, you want to make sure you're doing it with food safe stuff. You know, a lot of the salad bowl waxes, those are great options to use. You just want to make sure you're not using like Danish oil or something like that for a kitchen knife. You just don't want to take any chances with that. So put the logo in there with a Personalizer Plus electro etching machine. And I tape up my blades now on the larger blades, because when I'm using the Wicked Edge, there's a chance that I could scratch that surface, especially this at the heel. It's over 2 inches tall, this blade. And I just thought, you know what, I may as well just protect as much surface area as I can, just in case there's a little mishap. I don't risk, you know, damaging the surface that I've been working so long to get good. So didn't take that long to sharpen. I had actually ground this blade to about, I think it was like 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch. So it's very, very thin on the tip. And as you see there, this thing's a ridiculous slicer. It just doesn't even think about it. You look at it while you're holding this knife and the paper falls into pieces. It's almost that good. Always fun, very satisfying to cut paper. Sometimes I spend too much time in my shop after I've made a knife, and it's just like, wow, I've got a paper floor now. And see, we can kind of see that the finish that we get, like literally the hand sanding I did on this blade was about 15 minutes. And I think that the kicker, the thing that I liked the most, was that Meguiar's 20X scratch remover. That stuff worked just like a champ. Big heavy blade right there. It's got a nice sweeping belly to it, and that's kind of why I called it a Gyuto. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's like a banka or something. From what I understand, the research I've done, I think a banka's typically got a flatter belly to it. So this is a good rock chopping knife, just a good all-around knife from the kitchen. And there we have that nicely cleaned up little finger choil there, super comfortable. And I'm really, really happy with the finish that I got. Also, on that surface, that rough textured part, I just used Scotch-Brite and went over that when it came out of heat treat. You know, kind of went quicker just by hand, and rigorously rub it, use a little WD-40, and that's how I got that to kind of a shinier state. When it came out of the heat treat, it was a very flat, matte finish, so I just used Scotch-Brite on there, and that's how I just removed that little dull and kind of polished it up a little bit. And that is the completed knife. I hope you guys watching this, maybe you picked up a few tips, obviously, that you wouldn't have gotten from just the regular YouTube. Just my way to say thank you. One of the funniest comments I got on this video was like, well, it cuts paper, why don't you ever try cutting vegetables? I'm like, dude, you could have watched for like 20 more seconds and we could cut a pepper for you. So anyways, guys, just as a way to say thank you so much for your support here on Patreon. It does not go unnoticed. I know I'm not overly active on Patreon, and I'm really going to work hard to change that and give stuff to you guys that other people don't get, because I feel that's only right. And again, I'm going to say thank you for your support. I really do appreciate it. More than anything, the fact that you let me know that you appreciate. I'm not a knife expert. You know, I'm learning stuff, and I'm trying to figure this out as I go, and sharing stuff that I've just learned. It's so rewarding to see what you guys get from it, and that it helps other people. So that to me is the biggest payoff, and I hope you guys get something from these videos, and thank you so much for your support. Take care. Cheers.